Hello, welcome back to Hazel Jane Tarot. Today I'm doing a VR to the wonderful Candysoulandsoil, and this is her hashtag dating the tarot 2020. Now I appreciate it is now 2021, but I'm finally getting around to doing this fun tag, which gets you to imagine your tarot decks as different kinds of dates, and also was to get us to think a little bit about those the also rans in your tarot collection, like the decks that don't make your top 5 favorite decks, but that are coming in and maybe even going out of your tarot collection. So, without further ado, the first one was the Cheapskate Date. So this is my cheapest tarot deck, the Everyday Tarot. Now I wouldn't say I didn't buy this because it was cheap. I bought it because it was by Biddy Tarot, and I had used a lot of Biddy Tarot's free online resources, and particularly the Biddy Tarot podcast, and I felt like I should probably buy something that had been produced by Biddy Tarot, so I got the deck, but it was only $9.99 or something like that. So how has my cheap date worked out? Well, I don't really use this deck, and I have to say it has been on and off my sort of re-home declutter list. I've considered just donating it or giving it away, but I ended up it keeps coming back off that pile and back onto my shelves again. I do really quite like the sort of consistent pretty aesthetic of this deck. I mean, it's very on brand for Biddy Tarot with the purple, gold and white, but those are nice colours. The thing I don't like about it is the thickness of the cards with the size. Like there, as I try to page through, they get stuck together, and I've bent them quite a lot, like kind of trying to work them in so that they're easier to work with. But where I decided I actually thought I might hang on to this deck was because the cards are small and the people are very often shown in profile because they're silhouettes. You can end up, if you were going to do like a large spread, you can use quite a lot of cards and you can start to look at the way the characters in the cards interact with each other. And I did a course back in December with the fabulous Tom Benjamin. It was a hashtag, he called it the Tarot Jam. And it was great. But one of the things that we worked on was, using really large spreads and, looking at who's the querent in the spread and who are other people in this large spread. And this deck was perfect for that type of a exercise. So again, while I still haven't really read with it, my cheap date is not going anywhere for now because it sort of fills a function that none of my other decks do, because it is small and because it's really very directional in the way it's designed. So that is the Everyday Tarot by Bridget Esselmont and Eleanor Grosh, and that is my cheapskate date. Okay, so the slow burner date. You might laugh what I've picked for my slow burner, but it's the Rider-Waite Smith, or in this case, this is the Smith-Waite Centennial deck. I have one other version of this deck, which I bought last year, but this is the one I've had for a while. So as you can see, this is fully in order. It's still in order because I have literally never read with this deck. I bought this, I think this was maybe my 4th tarot deck purchase, and I got it because I felt like I should have one of these decks for study purposes, and that's all I have ever used this for. I would pull it out when I'm looking at a card to break down the symbolism and look up each of the elements. So like say in this card, I'd be starting to look at, okay, what about the lemniscate, what about the wreath, of flowers, the posture, the position of the, I'd start to break apart all the elements of the image as part of my study, and then I'd look at other versions of the card that I have and how those elements appear in other versions of the tarot. Because most of the decks I read with are Smithwaite based, but I never actually read with this deck at all. So when I first started reading tarot, like in the late 90s, I was very turned off by this deck. I really didn't like the imagery. I thought the pictures were ugly, and I didn't want a copy of this deck. I never was attracted to reading with it, and I just looked at the images of it in books as part of my studying alongside the deck that I actually had. But over time, and I think it's just with constant exposure, and the more I get deeper into the symbolism in the images and understand the way they're, the cleverness of how they've been put together, and the meaning, and my ability to maybe look at a particular symbol that appears in the card and decode some meaning from that. The longer I've been interested in tarot, the more I like the Rider-Waite-Smith. It's growing on me. And I have recently got the Blushing Fool, the 1972 printing of the Rider-Waite-Smith, and I love it. I like it a lot better than this one, because it has a really nice vibrant blues, and the cards, this cardstock's lovely. This is the US Games cardstock, which is really nice to work with, but the Blushing Fool is just on luscious cardstock, and it is a really nice collector's item to have as well. So I've gone from being completely not just indifferent to, but really quite turned off by the Rider-Waite-Smith, to having spent £50 on a Blushing Fool. So it has been a slow burner for me, and I now would read with my other version of this, with the Blushing Fool. I would read with it now as well. So that has been a long couple of decades in the making, slow burner relationship with that deck. So the next one is the Blind Date, the deck you bought without having seen any cards and just sort of on the spur of the moment. And there were a few decks that I've bought without seeing very many cards. When I see a deck that I'm really attracted to, I tend not to watch walkthroughs because I want there to still be an element of surprise. And like, I could have picked for this the Modern Love Tarot, which I just received there last week, because when I ordered that deck, I'd only seen 3 or 4 cards because it was still in the process of being made. But I only recently did an unboxing of that deck, so I thought I'd pick something else. And this is a deck that I bought in a local shop, and we don't have like that. The shop near me doesn't have like a copy of the deck in a folder that you can flip through, or an open box or anything. They just have them, and they're wrapped in plastic, so you can't see anything inside the box. So I bought this just because I was in the shop and I wanted to buy something. And so I got the Pre-Raphaelite Tarot. I do enjoy Pre-Raphaelite art, and it looked like it was going to be kind of pretty, and that was it. So my Blind Date, and I took it home and had a look at it. Now, how has the Blind Date worked out? I haven't read with this yet. And one of the reasons I haven't read with it yet is I sort of started looking into which paintings are represented in the cards, and I didn't quite finish that process, because very irritatingly to me, the book doesn't tell you. So it's one of those little white books that has multiple languages, but it doesn't tell you what painting it's based on. So I did a very extensive wade through Pre-Raphaelite art on the internet, and I was just looking for images, and then looking to see where any of those images in the deck. So for example, there, that 5 of Chalices. So I found that so that's a John William Waterhouse painting called Destiny. that's based on. Now these are not, it's not a classic art deck in the sense that it hasn't used the actual paintings. These have all been redone. So we have here the little book, sorry, to give it in focus, is by Valeria Minozzi, and the artwork is by Giuliano Costa. So Giuliano Costa has done all these pictures, but they're based on pre-Raphaelite images. So some of them I knew, like that's the Lady of Shalott being used for the Six of Swords, so I recognise that. But this one I found doing a bit of research. This one, the Four of Swords. This is a painting called The Death of Chatterton by Henry Wallace. The Nine of Pentacles, that's April Love, I think is the name of that painting. So yeah, that's April Love by Arthur Hughes. So you can see in the little white book I've been writing in the names of the actual paintings when I found them. So these are all based on extant paintings. That is Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, PRB. That's a painting of Rossetti, I believe. So then, but there's a lot of cards that I haven't found. So if we take a break there, that little card was a bookmark for me to separate out. There's a lot of cards that I haven't found a source painting for, and it's very possible that some of these don't have a source painting, that they're just written in, or they're painted in the style of. Like that to me looks like that's from a painting, so I would want to find out what painting that's from. Whereas some of these are perhaps just tarot cards painted in the style of the other pre-Raphaelite images. Like that's an extant painting. So I just hadn't quite finished the process of figuring out what, and I mean, I know I could read with it perfectly well without without finding the source paintings for every card, but it just bothered me. I felt like I wished that they had credited all the original paintings, because to me, a deck like this, if it's just pretty, then I might as well read with another deck. But if I know the painting that's been used, then I can layer that on to my understanding of the card, if that makes sense. So the backs are really cool. I love the backs, even though they're not reversible. They're just like a crazy, like the kind of wallpaper you'd see in a stately home, you know. But this, so it's a nice deck. I'm holding on to it, but I have never read with it yet, and I don't know if I'll ever really bond with this blind date, but I think it's an interesting deck. Okay, so I'm taking a bit longer over these than I had planned. I'll try to speed up a wee bit. The Rebound Date. Okay. The Dark Mansion Tarot. If you've watched my review of the Dark Mansion Tarot, which is on my channel, I tried to work with this, or I worked with it in October, and we didn't quite gel. And I had decided I was definitely going to get rid of the Dark Mansion. And then, as you can see, it's in order, because I sat down the other day to put it in order to potentially list it for sale online. And as I was looking through the cards, I just thought, oh, it's really a very attractive deck. Like, the art is fabulous. And I don't know why I didn't really connect with it, but when I look at it again, I'm like, oh, look at that orange. You know, it is a really pretty deck. So I took it off my get rid of pile and I put it back on my bookshelf again. And I don't know, we are staying together for now. Like, look how pretty that is. But this was a very much a FOMO purchase that I picked up when the Dark Mansion was all the rage. I think it was sort of January 2019. And it's probably not a deck I would buy now, because I think I've learned a bit more about what I like in a deck, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to let it go or not. So that's my Rebound Date. the surprise love affair, the one that you got together with and didn't think you weren't, wasn't your normal type really. Although there is a not my type, which is a separate prompt. But anyway, my surprise love affair is the Dream Keeper's Tarot. This is a deck that I became kind of obsessed with when I first saw the art online. This is the indie version by Liz Houston. It's coming out as a mass market deck this year, so keep an eye out for that, because it's obviously the indie version is gorgeous. It has the most lovely, slidey, luscious matte cardstock. It's just gorgeous. But I'm sure the mass market version will be a lot more affordable. But there's a lot of things in this deck that you would imagine I wouldn't like, because it's a little bit creepy. The color tones are quite subdued. There's all these little skeletons. I mean, I'm not really into creepy things. All of my decks are quite bright and colorful, but this, I just could not stop thinking about it when I saw it on Instagram, and I just continually went back and looked at the images on Liz Houston's website, and eventually I bought it. And this was the first mass market deck, or the first independent deck that I ordered from America, and paid the postage and the customs and all that to get it sent over to the UK. And I just love it. It's a great reader. I've found like that Nine of Swords is just so powerful. And yeah, even though this is really not an art style that I would have said I liked, turns out I really, really do like it. And I don't have any other kind of vintage photo collage style decks. Just this one, and I don't know what it is about it, but this has been a surprise love affair. This is one of my favorites. And it also pairs really beautifully with the Oracle of the Mystical Moments. The cards are around the same size, and the art style is reminiscent, although Oracle of the Mystical Moments is maybe a bit more whimsical and bright than the Dreamkeeper's Tarot is a little bit darker. But this, I love it. Definitely surprise love affair. Now, in a similar vein, the Not My Type deck. This was maybe not so much of a love affair. So the Not My Type Date, the one I sort of took a chance on, even though it really wasn't my type, is the New Era Elements Tarot. And what makes it not my type is this is more of a Thoth-based deck. It feels very untrendy to say. It makes me feel kind of uncool to suggest it, but I'm not interested in learning Thoth. I'm quite happy to stick with more Rider-Waite-Smith based decks, and the Thoth keywords really put me off, and that's one of the issues I have with this deck. The art is unbelievably good. Like the Eleanor F. Piper who's done the art, I think the High Priestess is maybe a self-portrait I've heard, but the art is stunning, and I mean, that's really why I ordered the deck. I also don't have a lot of black and white decks. Most of the decks I have are in very bright colour. There are some very confronting images in this deck, and I'm maybe going to just avoid showing them today if I can. But some of the interpretations of the cards are a little different to what I would be used to. We also have, strength as 11 and justice as 8, but I can work with that. That's a Thoth thing, but it's not just, I think Marseille also uses that, and I can work with that. That doesn't bother me terribly. But it's these keywords, and I don't actually think these are exactly the same as the Thoth keywords always, because when I was trying to work with this deck, I did look into it a bit, but like 2 of Wands, domination, or 2 of fire, 3 of fire, exploration. This just, it doesn't speak to me. I find it very jarring. 6 of fire, victory, okay. but I find it quite jarring. I like the idea of a modern depiction of some of these concepts, and the art is, as I say, stunning. But there's also, I think, I mean, the court cards are gorgeous portraits, but they don't always speak to me of the archetype in the way that I'm more familiar with from reading. Like, the portraits are beautiful, but there also is a kind of, maybe as just a slightly negative, like, this is kind of like going on a date. If we use these date analogies for the hashtag, it's like going on a date with somebody who's really good looking, but ends up being kind of miserable to hang out with. You know, there's a lot of very, I mean, the five of cups is a sad card anyway, but like, that's really awful. Like, some of the cards in this deck are very, very dark in the imagery. And like, I just can't imagine reading for someone else with this deck, you know, if pulling this out for a stranger, because some of the images are just very confronting and upsetting to look at. So while I think the artistry in the deck and the thought that's gone into the way the concepts have been portrayed in a modern way, it's a pretty stunning deck, but it's not my type, and it's not one I can really read with. So this is in the moving on pile. The deck, I may have to delete your number. Ooh, the Moonchild Tarot. So this is another one that this is like the date that you had such a crush on, and you chased them, and you know, did everything you could to get in there, you know, get into their, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, to make contact with the person, you know, where you find out what bars they hang out in, and you make sure you're there just in case you might bump into each other. That was a bit like me with this deck. Like, I got myself on a mailing list to make sure I wouldn't miss it when it came back in stock. And I just was really a bit obsessed with the idea of getting this deck. And it is the most beautiful package. Again, it's like somebody that you have a crush on because they are just so perfectly turned out, you know, always immaculately groomed, really good looking. To me, that is this deck. Like, it is just, as a product, it's very high end. The box is gorgeous. The book is really nicely produced. The cards have this wonderful embossed, like, stamping on the back. Like, it's a very pretty deck, and I have tried to read with it multiple times, and it just leaves me cold. It doesn't really speak to me. I don't connect with it. And I think, again, it's probably because my reading style, my study is very much tied to the Rider-Waite-Smith. So when I see a card, I find something a bit different in the minors, that's just kind of like an attractive vintage photograph person against a sort of abstract background, or a photograph of a model. It doesn't speak to me. Like, these are absolutely beautiful. But as a tarot deck, I find I can't really read with it. And I know there are people who adore this deck and read with it and find it fabulous. But for me, like, that's the Six of Swords. That image doesn't communicate my understanding of the Six of Swords. So it's more, it just doesn't connect with me when I read with it. So it's beautiful, and you know, it's so gorgeous. I could take it out and just look at it. But yes, this is the time to delete your number deck. Now, the Forever Love. In this bag is my Lewellyn edition of the Gaian Tarot by Joanna Powell Colbert. Now, I will tell you how much this is my forever love. I got this deck, the Schiffer edition, It was my second only ever tarot deck. So I had one deck that I bought in 1997, and then I bought the Gaian Tarot. It must have been maybe, I don't know, 2014? I'm not sure. I love this card. It's one of my favourite tarot cards in the whole world. I want to feel like that lady feels every day. I love it. But so I had that, the Schiffer edition, and that was how I sort of started to get into tarot in a new way. Was through working with the Gaian Tarot. So I only had 2 tarot decks. Was the Moon Garden that I'd had from when I was a teenager, and then this one. And then I bought the Rider-Waite Smith as a study deck. But so this is kind of very foundational to my understanding of tarot. And then I picked this up in a shop. It was actually called Spooks in England, where I just found they had the Lewellyn edition for sale, not at extortionate prices, just had it sitting on a shelf for sale, and I bought it. And I have just ordered for myself the limited edition collector's edition of this deck directly from the artist, because it is such my favourite deck. I realised if I'd missed out on the collector's edition, I'd be really upset. So there's a really lovely mixture in this of nature imagery and of community, and it's quite a diverse deck in terms of the people depicted. But it's just a lovely world in this deck. I sort of feel like I want to live I want to live in this deck. It's such a lovely yeah, I don't know, this is my forever love. I adore this, and it it just never ceases to amaze me that everybody doesn't adore this, because I love it so much. And when I come across somebody on YouTube or on Instagram who loves this deck as well, I always get very excited. So that's my forever love. My stormy on again, off again relationship, I've decided to go for the Spirit Keeper's Tarot, because I think about stormy, like most of my tarot decks, you know, the relationship is quite yeah, I like it, it's lovely, I work with it, it's really interesting, you know, it gives me good readings. You know, there's nothing dramatic about my relationship with most decks. But the Spirit Keeper's Tarot, this is an independent deck by Benabel Wen, if you're not familiar with it. This is more of a stormy situation, I think, because Benabel has created like so many resources for this deck, that this is a deck that could just be your only deck. It could really take over. I mean, look at that gilding. It's such a cool deck. This is the first edition. I had the Vitruvian edition first of all, and then I just last year got hold of this deck through I bought it from Peekaboo Rose, from Julie. And I mean, it's fabulous. This deck is so interesting. It's full of esoteric symbolism. It's gorgeous to look at. I love it. But there's like a 22-week course. I have the book that goes with that. I have coloured in all the major arcana. There were like printable colour-in versions that you could do. The guidebook for the deck is like this thick. It's sort of all encompassing. So sometimes I'll pull this deck out and say, yes, I'm gonna work my way through all of this, and I get really into it. And I mean, I've coloured all the majors, and I've sort of created a majors only deck kind of from what I've done from that. And you know, I'll start into the workbook and I'll be studying and have all the books out, and I'm getting really into the symbolism of some of the cards. And then I just think, oh, this is just too much. Give me something else. And I put it all away, and I just stop working with it completely. And I use another deck that's kind of a bit more low maintenance, shall we say? A more low maintenance deck. And then I take this out again and think, oh, this is just so fascinating. And I get sucked into another bout of deep depth study and so on. So it's a kind of a a hot relationship in that it's sort of on again, off again. But it's not a deck I would ever break up with. This is a real treasure to have this in my collection. But it is a sort of, I feel like a high investment, high maintenance kind of a deck, because there's so much that you can do with it and so much study around it. So I can't always devote the amount of energy that this deck seems to not need, but there's the potential to devote a lot of energy to it and to the study of it. And I don't always have the time and attention that to devote to it. So that's why I've picked that as my stormy on again, off again date. Also, the fact that there's 2 of them now in my collection makes it kind of an even more complex relationship. And who knows, I could end up with 3 with this 3rd edition coming out this year. So yes, if you like the look of this and you don't have the Spirit Keepers Tarot, you follow Benabel Wen on social media if you aren't already, which you probably are. But the 3rd edition is coming out hopefully this year, and that'll be probably not to be missed. All right, so the last one is the Friends with Benefit dates. So Candy described this as like the kind of date that you can fall back in with for a good time, you know. And I decided to go for the Painted Tarot. This I got this given for my birthday last year. This is an independent deck by Sophie McKay Knight. It is absolutely gorgeous. And sure, if you were going to have a Friends with Benefits date, you would imagine you would want them to be good looking. And this deck is very good looking. It is just gorgeous. And the other reason I picked this for Friends with Benefits is I haven't really worked with this deck for a sustained lengthy period of time. You know, sometimes I'll work with one deck for a month or a few weeks, and I'll use it every day, and I'll use it for weekly spreads, and you know, it kind of get to know it a bit more in detail. I haven't done that with this deck yet, but I pull it out every now and again, sometimes just to look at it because it's so gorgeous. And I have read with it, but again, not in a sustained way. I sort of dip in and out of it. And I think like sometimes maybe after, say, an intense round with the Spirit Keepers Tarot, a beautiful sort of straightforward Rider-Waite-Smith style deck like this is a bit of a palette cleanser, you know. And it is just so gorgeous. Look at that, the swords crossed in the hair. So yes, this is my my beautiful Friends with Benefits date. So gosh, I've ended up talking for half an hour. I had not intended this video to be so long,